I remember the day I realized some things are just too broken to save. Not just objects, but relationships. I work at a gallery, restoring pottery shattered centuries ago, piecing together fragments archaeologists dig up. It teaches you patience, yes, but also a hard truth: some things can be saved, and some can't. You have to know the difference before you waste years trying to glue together something that will never truly hold. I never thought I'd have to apply that lesson to my own family, but here we are. My marriage to Chloe taught me the same lesson, the brutal way. She cheated on me with a guy named Blake, who worked at the wellness center where she was a receptionist. When she left, there was no apology, no begging, no hint of remorse. Just a blank statement that she needed to explore her feelings, and I should respect that. I watched her pack her life into Blake's truck on a Wednesday afternoon, standing in my driveway in Portland, Oregon. My parents, Eleanor and Arthur, were there that day. They watched her load boxes into another man's vehicle, and instead of supporting me, their son, they told me I should fight for her. My mother, Eleanor, said marriage was complicated. My father, Arthur, suggested I think about what I'd done to drive her to that point. And when I pointed out she was literally leaving me for someone else, they looked at me like I was being dramatic. They stayed in touch with Chloe after the divorce. Eleanor would casually mention her at family dinners like nothing had happened, as if Chloe hadn't walked out on 7 years of marriage without a backward glance. The settlement gave her half our savings. She left me Max, our dog, because Blake was allergic. 6 months later, I found out from a mutual friend that she'd dumped Max at a shelter. Blake apparently decided he'd try allergy medication after all. I went and got Max back. He sleeps at the foot of my bed now, in the small 1950s house I bought after the divorce. The hardwood floors creak in all the right places. On weekends, I refinish furniture in my garage, listening to jazz, sanding down old chairs. For the first time in years, I found actual peace. Not the kind you fake at family gatherings, but real, solid peace. The kind where you wake up on a Saturday morning without dread sitting in your chest like a stone. That peace shattered one afternoon. I was in my garage, sanding an old wooden stool I'd picked up at an estate sale. Jazz was playing low, Max was asleep in his corner, when I heard a car door slam outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. I like it that way. I turned off the sander and walked to the front window. That's when I saw her. Chloe, standing on my porch, holding the hand of a little girl, maybe 3 years old. Behind them, pulling into my driveway, was Eleanor and Arthur's car. Eleanor got out, casserole dish in hand, like she was arriving at a potluck. Arthur adjusted his jacket like he was about to give a speech. I just stood there, trying to process. Chloe looked thinner, exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The little girl, Hazel, clung to her leg, looking utterly lost. I opened the door before they could knock. I didn't say anything. Just waited. Eleanor smiled that controlling smile of hers and held up the casserole. "Sweetheart, just hear her out," she said. Chloe finally looked at me. Blake had left her. She'd made mistakes. She was behind on rent. Lost her job. Hazel needed stability. We were good ones. I was a good man. She didn't have anywhere else to go. Arthur stepped forward, put his hand on my shoulder. "You're a reasonable person, Ethan. You're a good man." Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "You have a house. You're doing well. You could help." Hazel was staring at me with big, brown eyes. She had no idea what was happening. She was just being dragged into the wreckage of adult decisions she didn't make. Here's what hit me in that moment: they didn't come because Chloe wanted forgiveness. They came because they needed a solution. Her life had fallen apart, and instead of helping her themselves, instead of letting her face the consequences of abandoning her marriage for another man, they decided to make it my problem. Because I had a house and a stable job, because I didn't burn my life down chasing feelings, I should absorb the fallout of her choices. Eleanor wasn't holding a casserole, she was holding a bribe. Arthur wasn't offering support, he was handing me a script he expected me to follow. Chloe wasn't asking for help, she was asking me to be the backup plan I never agreed to be. I looked at all three of them standing on my porch. I looked at that little girl who deserved so much better than this. And I said one word. No. Eleanor's face went blank. Arthur started to say something. Chloe's mouth opened like she was going to argue. I stepped back and closed the door. Locked it. I walked back to the garage, turned the jazz back on, and picked up the sander. Behind me, I could hear them talking. Eleanor's voice got louder. Chloe started crying. Arthur knocked harder. I didn't move. They stood out there for maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. Then I heard the car doors slam, the engine start, and the sound of them driving away. I sat down on my workbench, looked at Max, who'd woken up and was staring at me like he was waiting for an explanation. And I realized my hands had stopped shaking. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. This was me finally recognizing that some people will watch you break and then hand you the pieces like it's your responsibility to fix them. I walked inside, opened my laptop, and created a new document, Actions. Change locks, install security cameras, block all phone numbers, email lawyer, update emergency contacts, revise will. I sat there looking at that list, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Like I was making decisions based on what I needed, instead of what other people expected from me. Eleanor called that night at 9:30. I was already in bed, reading, Max curled up next to me. I watched her name light up my phone 3 times before it went to voicemail. She called again at 10 o'clock. Then Arthur called at 10:15. The notifications piled up like snow in a storm. The next morning, I had 6 voicemails and 14 text messages. Eleanor's messages, all in that same disappointed tone, saying we needed to talk like adults, saying I was being unreasonable and cruel. Arthur's voicemails were shorter, just him saying my name and asking me to call back. But there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard before, something sharp and angry underneath the surface. I screenshotted every message. Saved every voicemail. Put them all in a folder on my laptop labeled documentation. Then I blocked both their numbers. I blocked Chloe's number. And I went to work like it was just another day. By Thursday, calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. My Aunt Sarah left a message saying I was being cruel, that a little girl needed help, and I was turning my back on family. A woman I didn't know, with a different area code, claimed to be a friend of Chloe's and said I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning a child. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept screenshotting, kept saving, kept documenting every single attempt at contact. At work, my boss, David, pulled me aside during lunch. He asked if everything was okay at home, said I seemed distracted. I told him everything was fine, just dealing with some family boundary issues, and it was handled. He nodded. Didn't push. David's good like that. Friday morning at 6:35, I was making coffee when I heard a car pull into my driveway. It was Eleanor and Arthur's car. I watched Arthur get out and walk up to my porch with this determined stride, watched him try the door handle like he genuinely thought it might be unlocked. Eleanor got out and stood behind him, holding her phone like she was about to call me. I just stood there, drinking my coffee, watching them through the window. Arthur knocked loud, the kind of knock that says, "Open this door right now." I didn't move. He knocked again, called my name with that edge in his voice, even sharper now. Eleanor walked up and pressed her face against the window, trying to see inside. I stayed perfectly still in the kitchen, where they couldn't see me. They stood there for 15 minutes, trying different approaches, calling, knocking, checking the side gate. Finally, they gave up and left. I waited until their car disappeared down the street. Then I called a locksmith and scheduled him for that afternoon. I ordered security cameras online, the kind with cloud storage and motion alerts that would record everything. Paid extra for next day delivery. Monday morning, I had a meeting with Richard, my lawyer, at 9 o'clock. The same guy who handled my divorce. He doesn't smile much, but he gets things done efficiently. I brought my laptop, showed him the documentation folder, everything organized by date and type. He actually whistled. "You don't mess around," he said. I told him I'd learned from the divorce to document everything, to never assume people will be reasonable or honest. He went through the voicemails, the texts, the screenshots from unknown numbers. He leaned back in his chair with a look of professional satisfaction. "This is textbook harassment. We can absolutely work with this." I paid him an $800 retainer and left his office feeling like I'd just put on armor. Like I finally had someone in my corner who understood what I was dealing with. The security cameras arrived Tuesday, and I installed them myself that evening. Small units, mounted under the eaves, not obvious unless you were specifically looking for them. Wednesday afternoon, they caught Eleanor and Arthur coming back. I was at the hardware store buying sandpaper when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and watched in real time as they walked up to my porch, knocked, waited, looked around, confused about why I wasn't answering. Then they left. They had no idea they were being recorded. I saved every second of that footage to my laptop, added it to the documentation folder with a timestamp and notes. Thursday morning, David called me at work. He sounded uncomfortable, apologetic. "Chloe came to the lobby asking for you," he said. I could hear the unspoken question in his voice, the "what's going on here?" that he was too polite to ask directly. I told him if she came back, to call the police. I told him I had a lawyer involved and this was officially a harassment situation. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Understood." No judgment. No questions. I called Sharon in HR after lunch, explained the situation without unnecessary details. She added Chloe to a restricted visitors list. She said if Chloe showed up again, security would escort her out immediately. "This kind of thing happens more than people think," she said, and I felt grateful she didn't make me explain the whole messy history. Friday, I found a card wedged in my front door. My security footage showed Eleanor's car pulling up at 7 that morning, showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, then tucking something into the doorframe before driving away quickly. I didn't open it. Didn't even touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off the door and drove it straight to Richard's office. He opened it wearing latex gloves, like he was handling evidence in a criminal case. Inside was a handwritten letter from Eleanor, talking about legacy and forgiveness and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become. "This is manipulative as hell," Richard said, shaking his head. "None of this is about his health or family values. It's all about getting you to respond, getting you to break." He added it to our file and told me we were building something solid, something that would hold up in court if we needed it to. The following Tuesday afternoon, I was leaving the gallery when I saw a woman standing by my car in the parking lot. She was older, maybe mid-50s, and she smiled this warm, friendly smile when she saw me approaching. She introduced herself as Karen, Chloe's mom, and said she wanted to talk parent to parent about what was best for everyone. "I'm not a parent," I said clearly. I unlocked my car and got in without looking at her. She leaned down toward my window and started saying something about understanding and compassion and how we all make mistakes. I started the engine and looked directly at her. "Don't contact me again," I said. Then I drove away and called Richard from the car. He said we were building a strong case for restraining orders if we needed to escalate. Every incident like this just strengthens our position. That night, my friend Sophia texted me. She's Chloe's cousin, but we stayed friendly after the divorce because she's always been straightforward and honest. "They're planning an intervention. They're going to try to ambush you somewhere. Just warning you," she wrote. I thanked her, told her I appreciated the heads up. And I realized something, sitting there reading her message in my quiet house with Max sleeping on the couch. They weren't done. They were just getting started. And they genuinely believed if they just pushed hard enough, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The intervention was supposed to happen that Saturday at Eleanor and Arthur's house. Sophia gave me the details Friday night. They'd invited extended family and told everyone I was going through something serious and needed support. They'd even arranged for Chloe and Hazel to be there, probably assuming someone in the family would convince me to show up if they all ganged up together. I didn't go. I stayed home, spent the morning refinishing the stool in my garage. Around noon, Sophia sent me updates from inside the house. Everyone's here. They're waiting. Your mom keeps checking her phone and looking at the door, she texted. Then 20 minutes later, Chloe's crying. Your dad looks angry. They're telling everyone you've changed and become cold. I read the messages, turned off my phone, and went back to sanding. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Them, sitting in a living room staging an emotional ambush, while I stood in my garage doing exactly what I wanted to do with my Saturday. Sunday morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. The camera footage showed Eleanor's car pulling up at 7 o'clock in the morning. Showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, taping something to the door with shaking hands, then driving away quickly. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off and drove it straight to Richard's office without even opening it. He opened it wearing gloves, like always. Inside was a long letter from Eleanor, talking about legacy and forgiveness and family history and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become, how I was destroying the family over pride. This is manipulative as hell, he said, adding it to our growing file. This whole guilt-tripping about your grandfather? It's textbook emotional manipulation. We're filing for restraining orders this week. Monday afternoon, David called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, kept adjusting his glasses, not quite making eye contact. Eleanor had called the gallery that morning and told the receptionist I was having a serious mental health crisis, and David needed to check on me immediately. I could see he was trying to figure out if it was true, trying to balance concern for an employee with the obvious weirdness of the situation. I sat down. I explained the whole situation calmly and clearly, the divorce, the boundaries I'd set, the lawyer I'd hired, the documentation I had of every violation. David listened, nodded, and when I finished, he looked relieved. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Do what you need to do. We'll support you. I called Richard from my car in the parking lot, told him about the call to my workplace, and heard him typing furiously on his keyboard. That's harassment and potentially defamation. We're filing today, he said. And that same clarity from the first night settled over me again. The temporary restraining orders were granted Wednesday. Judge Hayes looked at our documentation, the timeline we built, and signed them without much hesitation or questioning. Thursday morning, a process server delivered them to Eleanor and Arthur's house. I wasn't there, but Sophia heard from family members what happened and texted me the details. Your dad answered the door, read the papers, then crumpled them up and threw them on the ground. He's furious. Your mom's in tears. They're calling you unstable and telling everyone you need help. But the important thing was they'd been served. They'd been officially notified. And any contact from this point forward would be a legal violation with real consequences. Friday afternoon, I was at the gallery, finishing restoration work on a Ming Dynasty bowl, when security called my extension. Your parents are in the lobby. They're saying it's a family emergency and they need to see you right now. The guard said, and I could hear Eleanor's voice in the background getting louder and more frantic. I told him to call the police immediately. I told him they had active restraining orders and this was a direct violation. I stayed at my desk while it all happened. David came by 10 minutes later and said they'd been escorted out by police. They claimed my grandmother had fallen and was in the hospital, dying. My grandmother died 6 years ago, I said, and David just shook his head in disbelief. The police gave them a warning for trespassing and violating the restraining order. They filed an official incident report, and I emailed a copy to Richard that night. This helps our case tremendously for permanent orders, he replied. The grocery store incident happened Sunday morning. I was buying coffee and eggs when I turned down the cereal aisle and saw Chloe standing there, with Hazel sitting in the shopping cart. She froze when she saw me. Her face went completely pale. I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording video. You see me, you leave, I said clearly and calmly into the camera. I made sure to capture her face, the timestamp, the location, everything Richard would need. She grabbed the cart and rushed toward the registers without saying a word. I saved the video, labeled it Exhibit C, and sent it to Richard before I even finished checking out. Tuesday, Richard called and said Eleanor had filed a counter-motion claiming I was having a psychological episode and that the restraining orders were based on my mental instability, not their actual behavior. It's a Hail Mary, he said. She has no medical records, no evidence, absolutely nothing to support this claim. The judge is going to see right through it. The hearing was scheduled for Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I took the day off work to prepare myself mentally. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Hayes was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. When I walked in, I saw Eleanor and Arthur sitting on one side, with Chloe positioned between them. It looked staged, carefully coordinated. This united front against me, designed to make me look like the unreasonable one. Richard laid out our case methodically and professionally. He showed the timeline, starting from their first appearance on my porch, the screenshots, the voicemails, the camera footage, the police report from the gallery, the grocery store video, the letter taped to my door. He showed the calls to my workplace claiming I was mentally unstable, the manufactured emergency about my grandmother who died 6 years ago, the intervention I never agreed to attend. Judge Hayes listened carefully, took detailed notes, and when Richard finished, she looked directly at Eleanor. Do you have medical records supporting your claim that your son is psychologically unstable? Eleanor stammered. Said she was just concerned as a mother. Said a mother knows when something's wrong with her child. Judge Hayes cut her off mid-sentence. Not liking one's family isn't a mental illness, she said firmly. I watched Arthur's face turn bright red. Judge Hayes granted permanent restraining orders for 3 years. No direct contact, no indirect contact, no third-party contact allowed. Violations would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. She looked at Eleanor and Arthur when she said it, made absolutely sure they understood the seriousness and consequences. Then she dismissed the court. I walked out without looking back. Richard shook my hand in the hallway and said I'd done everything right. I drove home in complete silence. 3 months later, my life looks exactly like I wanted it to look. I go to work. I restore ceramics that have been broken for centuries. I refinish furniture on weekends. I take Max camping with my friend Noah when the weather's nice. I updated my emergency contacts at work to remove Eleanor and Arthur completely. I revised my will to leave everything to charity, specifically arts education programs and a domestic violence shelter that helps people escape toxic family situations. My parents are strangers now. Chloe is someone I used to know in another life. And the peace I have isn't the fake kind I used to pretend existed at family dinners. It's real, and it's solid. Sometimes, the healthiest and most courageous thing you can do is recognize when a relationship, even with the people who raised you, has no structural integrity left to save. Then, you walk away to protect your peace. What do you think about this story?